Hey moms, it's Nakimi, and welcome to the channel and space for single mothers navigating motherhood. And as always, we do not bash the baby daddies because, well, we are here now. So this video is the part 3 and the final video I'm going to make in regards to things that you should think about before you become a mom. And I wanted to save this particular topic for last because it can be a little sensitive. And I'm going to be speaking primarily to Black women or minority women that are longing to become mothers. There's a lot to unpack in our community, and I think that we all know that. It's all over social media, which is not always a bad thing because I think there is and has been a mental health crisis, especially dealing with or pertaining to our Black men. So for my Black women, young women that are longing to be a mother, if you haven't watched part 1 and part 2 videos, I highly encourage you to go back and watch those because I kind of break down some of the things that I don't think that before we become parents we really need to consider on how we're going to handle those issues if they come about. And so Black women have all of those issues previously mentioned before, all of those things to consider. Plus, I feel that we don't consider what our children's lives will be living here in America. Okay, there's that whole FBA versus the diaspora conversation of those wanting to kind of move to various countries that are predominantly Black, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are a FBA or foundational Black American and you know a little bit about your history, you know as a Black woman the things that our forefathers went through and what they had to fight for us to be in the space we are today. And that goes back to slavery, civil rights, affirmative action, the burning of Tulsa, Oklahoma, Rosewood, countless others, right? We know about, the drug epidemic, specifically crack cocaine, that really plagued our communities in the 80s, from projects of how those were built to basically they were an entrapment for Black people in poverty. The welfare system, which started out primarily white women, white mothers were using the system, and then Black women started using the benefits, and it just became this whole big negative thing. They're lazy, et cetera, and whatever, hatred or rhetoric that has been spewed. We know about gang violence, all right, that has plagued our community. We also are aware of college tuition, not really skyrocketing until Black people start attending. We know why HBCUs were implemented or started, okay, why they were founded. We see today the disparity between predominantly Black schools in low-income areas versus, multicultural or predominantly white public schools. We also know about redlining, okay, where, we were kept from, getting loans for mortgages so that we can create the generational wealth, right? So we know about that. We're also currently living in current times of mainstream media, right, where it's kind of pushing the narrative that Black people are uneducated. The only successful Black men you see are those that are in entertainment or sports, right? The rap industry, where our girls are being hypersexualized or over-sexualized, right? We know that. We listen to the rap lyrics of our young men and how they really, really, really talk so negative and so nasty about women, and vice versa. The rap females are, they're not any better, right? So we know that. And all of those things is what you're up against. Because if you looked at my previous videos, I explained that your children's biggest influence is going to be their peers and the world and how they see it, which is why representation matters, right? Which is why we need the Shakiris, which is why we need the Venus and Serenas, which is why we need the Phylicia Rashads. We need strong Black representation, right? So with that being said, we know that we're up against, there's a spiritual warfare on all of us, the whole entire human race, but especially for Black men and women, okay? And so some of the things that we need to think about before we bring children into this world, especially raising them here in the U.S., before your child is born, it's already hated in a sense. And I don't mean just hatred like someone's physically hating your child. I'm talking about systemically, right? Your child you're going to have conversations with your young Black boys that your counterparts don't have to have with their boys. For example, you're going to have to coach them on if they get pulled over from the police to keep their hands on the steering wheel, right? Those are we have to protect our kids in a different way. We have to teach our girls about, not allowing, certain people, their counterparts, watch out when they want to touch your hair. Or code switching in corporate America. Like, there's just a lot of things that we have to do in order to even navigate society. We all know that because we're living it. And even if you make it to corporate America, right? I'm just using corporate America as an example. One thing's for sure, you don't see a lot of Black men. And you don't see a lot of Black people in C-suite positions. We as a race lack ownership and positions of power with enough clout to make a shift, the shift that we've long needed, right? So if you were to have a child and you're sending them to a school that is predominantly white, that can be a culture shock, right? We deal with microaggressions in the workplace, regardless of whatever sector that you're in. We already know that. We know how that feels, where we have to work twice as hard as our counterparts to even barely be seen to be worthy in the room, right? We know how it feels when, they want to touch our hair or ask for our ID if we're in a building where Blacks are the minority. We know that. We know how it feels to be told, oh, you speak so well. We get it. Those are the things that our children are going to be up against, or your child will be up against. And in my previous videos, right, I discussed about the job market. And so we really have to look at it through a different lens. It's almost like we have to have trifocals, where our counterparts may only have to have singular focals or whatever, right? So those are some of the things that you and your husband, if you haven't already, or if you haven't met your husband yet and you want children down the line, you need to make a mental note of this. Keep it within your purview, because these are some of the hard conversations that you and your spouse will need to have. How will we deal with that? Where are we going to raise our child? Would we homeschool? How are we going to raise a confident son and daughter to walk into a room and own it, regardless of if the people that are in it look like us or not. You know, something to think about. And as a young Black woman, if you're in your 20s and you haven't met your husband yet, you've really got to vet men, because unfortunately for our community, the Black community, marriage is not often sought after at a young age. You know, you don't really see a lot of our young Black men jumping to get married. And not to say that they're not out there, because everything is not a monolith. Like, none of this applies to everybody. You know, it's not a one-size-fit-all type society, right? But you have to really vet your your guy. Okay, so we already know that because of history and how it has really made a deleterious impact on us as Black Americans, we know that because the crack cocaine epidemic hit, because we know that welfare and there are a lot of other systemic racial systems put in place that have really helped keep us at a poverty level, not only financially, but mentally, right? So we know that single motherhood, there are a lot of young Black boys that were raised in a home with a single mother. And far too often, that mother was emotionally unavailable. You know, we see it now where many of our Black men have multiple children by different women. And I'm not saying that this is a majority. I don't want to sum it up and use those type of terms, because I don't want to rock the boat with that. That's not my ministry. That's not what I like to talk about. But I'm talking about, it is a problem, and it is something that we have to consider before we bring children into the world. You know, the majority of Black Americans at one point were raised up in Christian, you know, the Baptist Church, the Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal, whatever. We believed in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, right? And in the church, we're taught that a woman is supposed to submit to her man, right? We're also taught that homosexuality is an abomination. It's in the Word. It's a sin. That's what we believe. So when you had men before the LGBT community, I don't know all of the letters, no disrespect, forgive me, a lot of those Black men had to hide who they really were, because, you know, their family wouldn't accept them. You know, it was spoken ill about. It was frowned upon. It was considered the worst thing in America. You know, which is interesting, because we would sweep under the rug Uncle Willie Earl, who probably touched, you know, little Jadarius, but we fought to little Jadarius, you know, for having a little sass in him. And I'm not saying that all of gay people were touched when they were kids, but I'm just saying, you know, just wanted to throw that out there really quickly. But yeah, so we now have a plague of down low men. You know, patriarchy has also contributed to a lot of why men in general are the way that they are, misogynistic. Because as a man, society has told them, because you exist, you deserve. Because you exist, you are the head. Because you exist, this woman should submit to you. Society and social norms never really place emphasis on the caring of a woman. That not only providing for your family, but being in tune with your family and bonding with your family. Like, those conversations just don't hit. They're not really popular. Okay? So now ask yourself, as a Black woman, what was your household like when you grew up? Are you in your soft girl era? Are you a nurturing person? Do you tend to have a shell up? And I get why we have to be so hard sometimes, and why we have to be maybe why some of us are in the masculine energies, because we had no place. We were put there from a place of survival. You see, the world, may tell, little Meredith that, she's a princess and she can be whatever she wants to be. And, but, you get to little Mia and that's not so much. There's not a space that we have really been in society that protects us, right? So you have to ask yourself, do you want to pass on that hardness, or do you want to be a soft mom? I'm not just talking about like gentle parenting. I'm really talking about being in tune with your emotions. Are you vulnerable? Can you be vulnerable with your spouse? Because that's going to be needed in order to show, whether you have a son or a daughter, what a healthy dynamic looks like. Does your spouse value your opinion? Will he, in front of the kids, check with you so that his sons see that dad values mom opinion? She makes a contribution to this family. We see that mainstream media, and it's pushed out, that our boys should be, sagging with their drawers showing. And, our little girls are hypersexualized. They are, it's unfortunate. Nothing more than intimate objects. And so how will you and your husband kind of keep your kids, keep that negativity and those stereotypes at bay? How are you going to raise your Black son in a country that tells him he's inferior before he even, quite understands what that is? See, kids may not be able to verbalize and put into context and truly understand all of it, but they can feel when something's off, right? They can sense when there's a favoritism among siblings. Even if they can't say favoritism or understand how to word it, they can feel it, right? So how are we going to raise, how are you going to raise your sons to be assertive, to be kind, to be loving, to be protective, to be a leader? And most importantly, valuing what's between his legs, like his body parts matter as well. That getting up and just, knocking down every woman that's in sight that you think is fine, and then creating these broken homes, well, that's not good. It's not good for him. It's not good for the mothers. But most importantly, it's not going to be good for his children. How would you raise, your son to value either one or two things? Value women, and if you want to get married and have kids, or stay single, but definitely not to go out here just ruining women, damaging them. What social circles are you in? Because most of our young boys are seeing two ways out of poverty, either sports or entertainment, rapping. And they're so confused about entertainment. They really see all this money flashed on Instagram and wherever else social media outlet, and they think, wow, that's what I want to be. That because it looks like success, right? And make no mistake about it, even if you are in a nice neighborhood, quote unquote, that doesn't save you from your son or daughter from falling victim to the stereotypes. Right? How are you going to raise your daughters? Do you have a plan to raise your daughters to be modest? You know, there's no need to be going all outside with your cheeks hanging out of your shorts. Like, it's rude. Forget the whole Me Too and liberal and I can do what I want to do. And, you know, it's so uncouth. It's rude. You know, it's just so impolite to the public. Nobody wants to see that. You got children that could possibly be exposed to that. Like, you know, like how will you really, you know, sit down with your daughters and teach them that it's one thing to be sexy. You know, it's one thing to be fine and, you know, you got it going on. But then it's a whole nother thing when you are just classless and distasteful and borderline streetwalker behavior. Just saying. But guess what? That's normalized now. The baby mama culture is normalized. So if you're okay with that, cool. No judgment here. I'm not a judgy person at all, you know, but just some of the things to think about. It's hard to get your kids, I know, because if you haven't listened to my videos, my daughter is 24 years old. So I've lived this. I know how hard it is to try to teach your daughter to walk a certain path, but yet the world is pulling her a different direction, saying, no, it's cool. Everybody doing it. What are you talking about? You know, that's hard because it's like you're fighting not only for your daughter or for your kids, you're fighting with them, and you're trying to get them to trust you, to trust what mommy and daddy is saying will always have your best interest in life at heart. But you guys know what it's like to be in high school, right? No one wants to be the one that doesn't quite look like the others. No, we want to fit in. You know, if our homegirls are, you know, dressing and doing, and this is the style lately, you know. If your friends are dating guys and they're getting male attention, well, you're probably going to want some. So how do you raise your black daughter to be okay with not fitting in? You know, how do you be okay with, you know, your sons taking a different path and looking at these YNs as that's crazy. That's wild. What's the new word? That's diabolical. That's diabolical. I don't want to participate in that. No, thank you. You know, when his friends start pressuring him, talking about, man, you bought Mia some roses, that's simping, or whatever, whatever the term is. Like, how are you gonna teach your son to stand up and be like, nah, this is my lady. Y'all got it wrong. You know, I don't know. Just things to really think about. You know, how are your children going to adjust in, you know, the job force? Because as I previously stated, technology is replacing people. They're already reversing DEI, which, by the way, benefited white women is the vast majority. Black people were at the bottom of the polling, but that's neither here nor there, right? You know, Are you the type of woman right now that's working out, that's cultured? You know what I would like to see with young black girls, if you don't have kids, this is what I really like to see. I like to see young black girls. It warms my heart to see young black women travel. You know, they're not really trying to, deal with craziness with guys. You know, if a dude breaks their heart, they just gracefully walk away. You don't even hear from them again. They don't have time to explain nothing. You know, they're not singing, come pick up your clothes, I have them folded. You know, they're just sitting them at the door. So when he comes and knocks, the locks are changed and his clothes are politely just folded right on out there. He's not, it's just, they're traveling. You know, they're picking up baking classes, sewing classes. You know, they're in the book clubs. They're learning a different language. I love that for young black women. I love, love, love it. Absolutely adore it. And I love to also see our young black men that are happy. You know, they really do value their lady that they're with. They know how to open up the doors, and they're not with all of that riffraff. They're not trying to be the coolest that they see on Instagram and flash income tax money. They're not really interested in that. I absolutely love it. I love it, love it, love it. So those are some of the things that we have to really think about. If you get pregnant and you go into the hospital, that our counterparts have been taught to believe that we have a higher level tolerance of pain, and we just don't get the same gentle treatment always. We don't always get the gentle treatment that our counterparts get. Now, that's not in every situation with every medical profession, so I don't want you guys to be like, oh my God, but yeah. You got to really, really think about that. What's your relationship with your mom and dad? Do you have daddy issues? Do you have mommy issues? What does your village look like? Is this something you're really ready to do? And I could tell you now, sweetheart, if you don't have kids and that man already has kids, I'm vehemently against it. To each his own. I'm just saying, it's a lot. So, just like I've said before in my other videos, be smart, use your head, and these are some of the conversations. If you haven't thought about this, do genetic testing for any type of, illnesses or conditions that your child could be born with, or that you could have lying dormant, that pregnancy would bring about, that may, create complications in your pregnancy. Really be able to sit down with your man and your husband, and you guys discuss this. Truly discuss, is this something that you really want to do? Is bring a baby into the world that is already going to have, such what am I going to say? The chances that they'll have is so much slimmer to their counterparts just because they're black. What type of area are you raising your kids in? And how will you guys make sure that your children don't fall by the wayside and fall victim to the stereotypes? That's something that black moms have to think about. When your son gets his driver's license and he out on the road, I'm telling you right now, once they're off your lap, baby, they are on your heart. And my daughter is an adult, and I don't think I've ever prayed as much as I pray now for my baby. I pray for my baby. There is a spiritual warfare on our kids, and you got to know how to cover your children. You have to know how to intercede on behalf of your babies. And this is not to scare you as a black woman and say, well, just wouldn't have them. But we really have to kind of look at it at so many different angles. And then just when we got it, we got to go back and, smooth over it, with a fine-tooth comb. It's so much, especially here in America. Maybe your option would be to consider moving out of the country, starting somewhere else. I don't really know. But those are some of the things that I want, I would implore you as a young Black woman, if you don't have children, to think about, plan for before you have kids. So let me know what you guys think. That is all. I have really enjoyed speaking on this topic. I hope that you guys have found the videos helpful and informative, and most importantly, that you are really thinking about the things, if you have not already thought about those things, that you're thinking about them, and that it helps you guys on your journey or before you start your journey. As always, to my single mommies, you got this, mamas. Till next time, I love you guys. Bye.